Chief, Acting Chief Matt Dyess. These questions, some of them that we have ourselves, I did sit on the interviews with the Citronelle Police Department on some of theirs, and I have taken some of their questions that they had, and I thought some of them were real good questions, so I'm going to ask some of those questions that they were asked when they did their interviews. The first question was, what would you consider as your major weakness?
Probably my major weakness would be the lack of experience as a chief.
Thank you. What has been your biggest mistake as a police officer?
The biggest mistake was not heeding the advice of former Chief Parker about my driving habits whenever I first started.
On a 1 to 10, what grade would you give yourself on communication with your other officers?
8.5.
For what?
8.5.
How are you at coordinating functions with other law enforcement departments such as traffic stops, search warrants, and etc.?
Very effective.
Why do you think you're the most qualified person for the job?
I've been the Assistant Chief of Police officially for 2 years. In that time, I have helped retired Chief Reed run the department day-to-day operations and acting chief in his absence.
When identifying weakness of your officers and when identifying weaknesses of your officers, and what are your plans on improving this? You want me to explain that a little bit, Matt?
Yes, please.
Okay. If you have an officer that's weak in one area, such as trafficking or well, just to be lazy, this is, what are your plans on improving in this area? How would you go about in changing this officer, encouraging him?
The first thing would be discipline. If he's lazy, he likes discipline. If he knows that if he crosses a line, there will be punishment, he'll step up to the line or you'll have to weed him out.
How will you prepare other officers for promotional opportunities?
In that event, I would sit down with each of the officers, let them know what's expected of them for the promotion. I would assist them in studying the required materials through the personnel board.
What are your plans on boosting morale and equal treatment and update training?
That is one big thing, is equal treatment. That in itself would boost morale. A lot of the officers are talking about wanting to go to 12-hour shifts. You give them that would boost morale in most cases. There are a few officers who are not as energetic about going to a 12-hour shift, but in my opinion, once they started working those shifts, they would like them a lot better.
Do you feel like you're functioning to full capacity as assistant chief?
Yes.
You may have already answered answer this in a roundabout way, but if someone is pulling their weight on their shift, what are your plans on
Dis-
changing this as a chief?
Discipline.
If you were described by a friend, what would they say about you behind the badge or out of the badge?
Loyal.
What?
Loyal.
Would you describe yourself as organized or disorganized?
Organized.
What is your plans and approach to changing the police department?
First thing I want to start with is discipline. The department is lacking in discipline. Chief Reed did not want to hurt anybody's feelings. I think that was a major downfall. Once the officers know that if they cross a line, they will be punished, officers will start doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it and how they're supposed to do it.
How do you feel about community patrolling and your idea of what community patrolling is?
Community patrolling is going into the communities, not just riding the main drag, Highway 45, Bryan Road. Community patrolling is going into the communities and making sure that everything in that particular community is safe.
How do you feel about the importance of communication with the council and mayor, in particular mayor?
I think it is very important, so that the mayor and council are in the loop.
Okay, you have known for several weeks about the chief position promotion. What have you done to prepare yourself to apply for this position? And do you have a visibility plan for the department? If so, explain it.
What kind of plan?
Visibility plan for the police department.
To prepare for the chief's position, I've talked with Chief Reed. I've gotten some advice from him on different aspects of the job. I don't really understand what you mean by visibility plan.
Well, you may have already answered that probably in a roundabout way of what you're planning on doing with the police department, the improvements to the police department, how you plan on moving our police department forward, and you pretty much said the main thing is discipline and...
Correct. Increasing morale, that would go a long way. I want to see the officers need to be accountable for what they do. They're being paid to perform a job, and sometimes I think that job is not being performed the way that it should be, and I want to change that.
Thank you. I'm going to let the council ask you some questions, Matt, and then I'll give you a chance to ask council questions. So I'm going to start off with Warren. Jerry.
Thank you.
First question for you is, can you elaborate on your experience relative to criminal investigation that you've solved and or prosecuted?
There's so many cases that I have investigated. There's so many cases that I have prosecuted. One of the first cases, major cases that I worked when I was a young officer was a fatal shooting on Road Street. A young man was shot after he broke into a house. It all came down to what they were calling a drug deal gone bad. There were 3 individuals who broke into the residence, chasing a individual that lived at that residence. As they were leaving, the owner of the residence taken to, the case was taken to the grand jury, and the case was determined to be self-defense.
Thank you. Second question is, what does the position of police chief mean to you relative to being a spokesperson? A lot of people consider the chief as a porter right alongside the mayor. What is the position police chief has to take?
The recognition as the leader of the department, the city looks at the police chief to assist them in matters that the police department should take care of. For the last, as long as I can remember, I have done news interviews on behalf of the chief and the department. The chief, to me, is the public figure that the people look to in times of emergency and times of need.
Thank you. And my last question is somewhat two-part. Do you have a vision for the city of Citronelle at the point of this police chief? And where do you see the city relative to growth and demographics in the next 10 years? What would be your plan at the point?
I think the police department needs to grow along with the city. As the population increases, crime is going to increase. The city and the police department need to look at that and be prepared to grow along with each other. And my vision for the department is to get notoriety back in the community as there to help. Because that's why we're here, is to protect and to serve, not just to arrest people and write tickets. We're here to serve people, and that's the vision that I have.
Dan, would you tell us about your supervisor experience?
I was promoted to corporal in '96.